All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today we're looking at athlete migration. And trust me, this goes way beyond sports. We're using this fascinating article, The Global Migration of Athletes, Economic Gains versus Cultural Losses, to really get a feel for how this impacts the world. Get ready, because you're going to come away understanding not just the money involved, but the human stories behind those big contracts and the choices athletes have to make.
It's pretty wild, how globalization has basically turned the movement of athletes, especially in football and baseball, into this massive industry. You look at the English Premier League, it's pulling in top talent from everywhere and making bank more than any other football league out there. I think that really shows you the financial power of athlete migration, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I was reading that top European football leagues are bringing in billions of euros every year. A lot of that is because of these international players, too.
Exactly. And there are a bunch of reasons why that's happening. First off, you've got this mix of talented players coming from all over the world, right?
Yeah.
That just automatically makes the competition way more intense. And when the games are more exciting, well, you're going to have a ton of people around the world tuning in, wanting to watch. That means bigger TV deals, more merchandise flying off the shelves, the whole 9 yards.
So it's not just about one player being amazing. It's about how all that talent from different places shakes things up and brings in a way bigger crowd.
Exactly. Like, think about a player like Yaya Touré. His style was so powerful and dynamic,
Yeah.
And you could see those Ivorian roots in how he played. He wasn't just winning games, he was changing how people saw the game itself, how it was played. And that obviously translates to more fans, more hype, and yeah, more money.
Wow. When you put it that way, it makes you realize how much athlete migration actually changes things. It's about cultures mixing, changing how we see sports, and even pushing the limits of what's possible on the field.
It's pretty amazing to see how it all connects. But there's a flip side to this whole thing too. We're talking about host countries and these leagues raking in all this cash. But sometimes it seems like they're kind of forgetting about their own young athletes, the ones coming up through local programs.
So are some countries basically missing out on developing their own future stars because it's easier and cheaper to just sign players from other places?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Mm.
It's complicated, and there's not really a simple answer. But we have to think about it.
Mm.
Is this system, even though it has a lot of good things going for it, maybe creating some inequalities down the line?
That's a good point, something to think about for sure. So we've talked about how this impacts leagues and countries, but what about the athletes themselves? I mean, for someone who comes from a country where opportunities are limited, moving to play professionally could change their whole life, right?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine going from making just enough to get by to like 10 times your salary. Plus, you've got those big endorsement deals, the chance to play on the biggest stage in the world. And it's not just about the athlete either. It's about their families, their communities back home. Everybody benefits.
It's like they're playing for something bigger than themselves, like they're carrying the hopes and dreams of so many people with them.
It's a lot of pressure, for sure. But a lot of these athletes really step up. Look at Didier Drogba. He didn't just become a legend at Chelsea. He used his success to do something amazing. He helped tackle the healthcare crisis in his home country, Ivory Coast, by building this incredible hospital. That's the kind of impact that goes beyond just sports. It really makes a difference in people's lives.
That's a powerful story. It really shows how athletic success can lead to real change in the world. But let's be honest, it can't always be easy. Moving to a new country to compete at that level, there's got to be some serious challenges that come with that.
Oh, you're definitely right. We talk about the money and the excitement of professional sports, but there's another side to it, the human side. And that's something we need to talk about. The human cost of chasing these dreams. Migrant athletes, they often face these cultural hurdles, things that people don't always see.
Yeah, it's easy to forget they're not just changing jobs, they're changing their whole lives. Moving to a new place with a different language, different customs, everything's different. And then they're supposed to be at the top of their game on top of all that. It's got to be tough.
Imagine the pressure, right? Competing at the highest level, trying to learn a new language, figure out a whole new culture, and on top of that, you're away from your family, your friends, your support system. That's the reality for a lot of these athletes, and it can take a toll.
So what are some of the specific challenges they deal with?
Well, one of the biggest ones is cultural displacement. Think about it. You're in this new place. Everything feels strange. Maybe you don't understand the language. You might not have anyone to really lean on. And it's easy to feel alone, especially in a world as competitive as professional sports. And that feeling of being alone, it can be made even worse by something else. Xenophobia and racism, those are still problems today. Sadly, it doesn't matter if you're at the top of your game, a lot of migrant athletes still have to deal with that.
It's so disheartening that in this day and age, athletes are still facing that kind of prejudice.
It really is. And we can't forget about cases like Mario Balotelli. Here's a world-class footballer playing for Italy, but he was constantly dealing with racist chants and abuse from fans. It just shows you the ugly side of this whole globalized sports world.
Yeah, it's a reminder that no matter how successful or famous you are, prejudice can still find you. Makes you think about what that does to someone emotionally, always having to prove yourself, not just as an athlete, but as a person deserving of respect.
Absolutely. And then you add another layer to it, national identity. Imagine being born in one country, building your life in another, and then having to choose who to represent on the international stage. That's a tough decision, a really personal one, and it's something a lot of migrant athletes struggle with.
I can't even imagine how hard that must be, feeling torn between two cultures, two identities, and no matter what you choose, someone's questioning your loyalty.
It's definitely a tough spot to be in, and we've seen how differently it can play out. You've got Thiago Motta, for example. He was born in Brazil, but decided to play for the Italian national team. And people had mixed reactions. Some praised him for his commitment to his adopted country, but others questioned his loyalty to his birthplace.
It just shows you how complicated things get with globalization. It challenges our ideas of what it means to belong to a nation, even in the world of sports.
For sure. And to really get a grasp on how deep this issue goes, it helps to look at some individual stories. Let's start with Yaya Touré. We talked about him earlier. He was incredibly successful in the English Premier League, became one of the highest paid African athletes ever. He was also a huge symbol of hope back in his home country, Ivory Coast, using his wealth to give back to his community.
It's an amazing story of success, but I remember reading that even with all that, he still experienced racism and prejudice.
Yeah, it's sad but true. Even at the top, those challenges were still there. He talked openly about the racism he faced on and off the field, and it just highlights this painful reality. Even for someone like him, with all his accomplishments, prejudice can still follow you.
Makes you realize there's a real person behind those trophies and all that fame, dealing with a lot of complex emotions and challenges.
Now let's look at someone different. Kylian Mbappé. He's a young superstar, born in France, to parents from Cameroon and Algeria, and he represents a whole other side of this story. His success, it's made him like an icon of modern multicultural France. But it's also sparked these debates about national identity. Some people questioning his Frenchness because of his heritage.
It's like his story reflects this bigger conversation happening in society about what it means to be French in today's world, a world where everything's so connected.
Exactly. It's fascinating, right? Just his presence challenges these traditional ideas of belonging, and it forces us to really think about how national identity is changing, evolving.
Okay, so we've seen how athlete migration impacts leagues, countries, and the athletes themselves. It's clearly not just one thing. There's the economic side, the cultural challenges, and the human stories in the middle of it all. But what I'm wondering is, whose job is it to address these challenges? Like, who's responsible for making things better?
That's the key question right there. I mean, leagues and organizations like FIFA, they've definitely done some things to fight racism and try to make things more inclusive, but there's always more that can be done. They have a responsibility to make sure everyone has a fair shot on and off the field, no matter where they come from.
It's not just about rules and policies, though, right? It's about creating a culture where everyone feels welcome and respected.
You got it. It's about making sure that athletes from different backgrounds feel supported, not just as players, but as human beings.
And what about us, the fans? Do we have a role to play in all this?
Absolutely. We can be more than just people watching. We can be informed, engaged fans who appreciate all the different backgrounds and cultures these athletes bring to the game.
Yeah.
We can speak up when we see prejudice and discrimination, and we can support groups that are working to make the sports world a fairer and more welcoming place.
I love that. It's like we're not just watching, we're part of shaping a better future for sports.
Exactly. We need to remember that athlete migration is more than just business. It's about real people and their stories, with all the good and the bad. And as fans, we can be part of making those stories better.
We've covered so much ground today, it's amazing. We've talked about the money, the cultural hurdles, and the human side of athlete migration. What really gets me thinking is this tension between what individuals want and what nations and these big sports organizations want. Sometimes it feels like they're pulling in different directions.
Yeah, it's like trying to balance on a tightrope, and it's always shifting and changing as the world gets more and more connected. It really makes you wonder, what's next for athlete migration? How will it continue to shape the world of sports?
That's a big question. I mean, globalization isn't slowing down anytime soon, and technology is changing everything so fast. How can you even begin to predict what's going to happen with athlete migration?
It's kind of like trying to predict the weather a year from now, you know? But if we look at what's happening right now, I think it's safe to say we're moving towards a world where it's easier to get into professional sports, especially with online scouting and training becoming more common. Those barriers are starting to come down.
So you're saying we could see a future where a talented kid, even in a remote village somewhere, could be discovered online and then trained and developed through these platforms. Like, they could reach levels of success that were unimaginable just a few years ago.
Exactly. Imagine a world where it doesn't matter so much where you're from. If you've got the talent, you can shine on the global stage. That's pretty exciting, don't you think?
For sure, but it also makes me wonder, how are these established sports organizations going to adapt to all these changes? Will they embrace it or try to hold on to the old ways of doing things?
That's a huge question, and I hope they see this as a chance to evolve and become more inclusive. Maybe we'll see things become more flexible, with scouting networks reaching further and these organizations becoming more sensitive to different cultures.
So instead of expecting every athlete to fit into the same mold, they'll need to create environments where diversity is celebrated, where athletes from all backgrounds can succeed.
Exactly. It's about understanding that different cultures have different approaches to training, to communication, even to competition itself. And instead of trying to make everyone the same, embracing those differences could lead to a more dynamic and ultimately more successful world of sports.
It's like the sports world is becoming a reflection of our globalized society. It's forcing us to confront these questions about diversity, inclusion, and how our identities are changing.
It's a powerful way to look at it. And I think it shows how important awareness, empathy, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions really are. As fans,
Right.
we can't just sit back and expect others to figure out these complicated issues.
So we need to be more than just passive fans. We need to be part of the conversation, challenge prejudice when we see it, and support initiatives that are working to make the sports world more inclusive and fair.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about realizing that we as fans have a responsibility to help shape the future of sports. By being informed, engaged, and compassionate, we can help create a sports world that reflects values of fairness, respect, and opportunity for everyone.
This has been an amazing deep dive. I'm honestly feeling inspired by the stories of these athletes overcoming obstacles to achieve their dreams, but also challenged to think about my own role as a fan in making the sports world more inclusive and equitable.
It's been great exploring these complex issues with you. If there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this, it's that athlete migration is about more than just a game. It's a reflection of our increasingly interconnected world, with all its complexities and opportunities.
Perfectly said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's all make a commitment to be more than just spectators. Let's be informed, engaged, and compassionate fans who appreciate the diversity and the human stories that make sports so captivating. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
And that feeling of being alone can be made even worse by, xenophobia and racism.
Mm-hmm.
It's sad, but true. Those are still problems in sports today. Doesn't matter how good you are, a lot of migrant athletes still face that kind of prejudice.
It's really disheartening that in this day and age, athletes are still dealing with that.
It really is. And we can't forget about cases like Mario Balotelli. I mean, here's a world-class footballer playing for Italy, but he was constantly getting racist chants and abuse from fans. It really shows the ugly side of this whole globalized sports world.
Yeah, it's a harsh reminder that no matter how successful or famous you are, prejudice can still find you. It makes you think about what that does to someone emotionally, always having to prove yourself, not just as an athlete, but as a person worthy of respect.
Absolutely. And then you add another layer to it, national identity. Imagine being born in one country, building your life in another, and then having to decide who to represent on the international stage. That's a tough choice, a really personal one, and it's something a lot of migrant athletes struggle with.
I can't even imagine how difficult that must be, feeling torn between two cultures, two identities. And it seems like no matter what you choose, someone's questioning your loyalty.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in, and we've seen how it can play out in different ways. Take Thiago Motta, for instance. He was born in Brazil, but chose to play for the Italian national team. People had mixed reactions. Some people praised him for being dedicated to his adopted country, but others questioned if he was really loyal to his birthplace.
It just goes to show how complex things become with globalization, doesn't it? It challenges our whole idea of what it means to belong to a nation, even in sports.
For sure. And to really understand this issue, it helps to look at specific stories. like Yaya Touré, we talked about him earlier. He had amazing success in the English Premier League, became one of the highest paid African athletes ever, and he was such a symbol of hope in his home country, Ivory Coast, using his wealth to give back to his community.
It's a truly incredible story, but I do remember reading that even with all that success, he still faced racism and prejudice.
Yeah, sadly it's true. Even at the top, those challenges were still there. He talked openly about the racism he experienced both on and off the field. It just highlights this painful reality that even for someone like him, prejudice can still be a problem.
It really makes you realize that there's a real person behind those trophies and all that fame, someone dealing with complex emotions and challenges.
Now let's contrast that with someone like Kylian Mbappé. He's a young superstar born in France to parents from Cameroon and Algeria, and he represents a different side of this whole thing. His success has made him an icon of modern multicultural France. But it's also sparked debates about national identity, with some people questioning his Frenchness because of his background.
It's like his story reflects this broader conversation we're having as a society about what it means to be French in today's world, a world where everything's so interconnected.
Exactly. It's fascinating how just his presence challenges those traditional ideas of what it means to belong. It forces us to rethink how national identity is changing, how it's evolving.
So we've seen how athlete migration affects leagues, countries, and the athletes themselves. It's clearly a complex issue, with the economics, the cultural challenges, and the human stories all intertwined. But what I'm wondering is, whose responsibility is it to deal with these challenges? Who's in charge of making things better?
That's the big question, isn't it? Leagues and organizations like FIFA, they've definitely taken steps to address racism and promote inclusivity. But there's always more that can be done. I think they have a responsibility to ensure that everyone has a fair shot, both on and off the field, regardless of their background.
But it's not just about rules and policies, is it? It's about fostering a culture where everyone feels truly welcome and respected.
You're absolutely right. It's about creating an environment where athletes from diverse backgrounds feel supported, not just as players, but as people.
And what about us, the fans? Do we have a role to play in all of this?
We do. We can be more than just people watching from the sidelines. We can be informed. We can be engaged fans, fans who appreciate the different cultures and backgrounds that these athletes bring to the game. We can speak up when we see prejudice or discrimination happening, and we can support organizations that are working to make the sports world a fairer and more welcoming place for everyone.
I love that idea. Like, we're not just passively watching, we're actually part of creating a better future for sports.
Exactly. It's important to remember that athlete migration is more than just a business deal. It's about people, their stories, the good and the bad that comes with it all. And as fans, we can be part of making those stories better.
We've covered so much today. It's incredible. The economics, the cultural challenges, the human side of it all. And what really sticks with me is this tension, between what individual athletes want and what nations and these big sports organizations want. Sometimes it feels like they're pulling in opposite directions.
Yeah, it's like trying to walk a tightrope. It's a constant balancing act that keeps shifting as the world becomes more interconnected. It makes you wonder, what's next? How will athlete migration continue to shape the world of sports?
That's a big question. Globalization doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon, and technology is changing everything so rapidly. How can we even predict what's going to happen with athlete migration?
It's a bit like trying to predict the weather a year in advance. But if we look at the trends we're seeing, I think it's safe to say we're heading towards a world where it's becoming easier to break into professional sports. Especially with online scouting and training platforms becoming more common, those traditional barriers are starting to crumble.
So you're saying we might see a future where a kid with talent, even if they're in a remote village somewhere, can get discovered online. And then they could get training and development through those platforms, potentially reaching levels of success that were unimaginable just a few years ago.
Exactly. Think about it. A world where your location matters less and raw talent, regardless of where it comes from, can shine on a global stage. That's a pretty exciting thought, isn't it?
Absolutely. But it also makes me wonder how those established sports organizations, the big leagues, are going to adapt to all of this. Will they embrace these changes or try to cling to the old ways of doing things?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I truly hope they see this as an opportunity to evolve and become more inclusive. We might see a shift towards more flexible systems, scouting networks that reach further, and a greater emphasis on understanding and respecting different cultures within those organizations.
So instead of expecting every athlete to fit into this one specific mold, they'll need to create environments where diversity is celebrated, where athletes from all backgrounds can truly thrive.
Exactly. It's all about recognizing that different cultures have different approaches to training, to communication, even to how they view competition itself. Embracing those differences, rather than trying to force everyone into the same box, could lead to a more dynamic and ultimately more successful sporting landscape.
It's like the sports world is becoming a mirror of our globalized society, isn't it? Forcing us to confront these questions about diversity, about inclusion, about how our very identities are evolving.
That's a powerful way to put it. I think it highlights the importance of being aware, having empathy, and being willing to challenge our own assumptions. As fans, we can't just sit back and expect others to figure out these complex issues for us.
So we need to be more than just fans in the stands. We need to be
Yeah.
part of the conversation. We need to challenge prejudice wherever we see it. And we need to support those initiatives that are pushing for a more inclusive and equitable sports world.
Absolutely. It all comes down to recognizing that we as fans have a collective responsibility to help shape the future of sports. And by being informed, engaged, and compassionate, we can contribute to creating a sports world that embodies fairness, respect, and opportunity for all.
This deep dive has been incredible, really thought-provoking. I'm walking away feeling inspired by the stories of these athletes who overcome so much to achieve their dreams. And I'm also challenged to really think critically about my own role as a fan in creating a more inclusive and equitable future for the world of sports.
It's been a pleasure discussing these important topics with you. If there's one key takeaway I hope our listeners leave with today, it's that athlete migration is so much more than just a game. It's a reflection of our interconnected world with all its complexities and possibilities.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's all make a commitment to be more than just spectators. Let's be informed, engaged, and compassionate fans who appreciate the diversity and the human stories that make sports so captivating. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.